So for our Intro to Cyber Module 3 initial attempt of the assessment, students on average consume 38 out of 60 minutes. They did not utilize 22 minutes out of 60 for an open book assessment. Now, I'm not criticizing. For a first attempt, a 4.16 out of a top score of 5, discounting extra credit. That's over 80% for a first attempt. That is very solid. Based on student, I'm sorry, what? There should have been extra credit in the mix, yeah. So the question was raised, was there extra credit? There's usually extra credit items in the mix for the first attempt, but then for retakes, we don't. So you get, and usually extra credit is about 10% of the total. So if it's a 5-point assessment, you'd get a half a point for additional extra credit questions. And of course, for reconciliation. So based on student responses, the Blackboard algorithm to analyze the difficulty of questions determined that there were 11 easy questions, 5 medium questions, and 2 hard questions. Which means that for the final attempt, I really need to turn up the screws, right? And or it means that students were very prepared. That's what it means. In any case, 5 are considered medium and 2 are considered hard. That's not a bad mix, I mean, considering. What I'd like to do is blitz this and then provide a preview of coming attractions for your 4.1 assignment, right? So we're talking about Kali and hoping that everybody would get the download for Kali completed at least. And so the goal is to go ahead and walk through a quick import of the Kali appliance if you downloaded the appliance. All right, so a multiple answer question proved the most difficult for our students. It says you are a member of the BCPT, which probably means business continuity planning team. If you look in the slides, there's probably lots of acronyms in there, but it has to do with business continuity. If you see BC, if you see DR, that would be disaster recovery. If you see IH, that's incident handling, and or IR, incident response, right? And are presented a resource that will allow essential workers to continue work following a natural disaster. Is this relevant for us? Oh, yeah. We have hurricanes, tsunamis, all kinds of stuff. Oh, and on St. Thomas, they have volcanoes. Yeah, but I'm not going to talk about that. All right, prior to adopting the use of this resource, what are some critical criteria that must also be satisfied or valid while disaster conditions remain in effect? That's the phrase that pays. When disaster conditions remain in effect, does everybody recall something called a curfew after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, right? So in order for this to be a viable alternative, right? So if essential workers are allowed to continue, what are some of the criteria? The first answer that should have been selected is a method of adequate payment to provision this resource must be accessible until regular systems are restored. People are not going to work for free. If in the aftermath of a disaster, you cannot continue to support your essential personnel with like a payday, it's going to be hard to sustain that. I'm just saying, okay? Does that make sense? Would that be an essential element or criteria of a business continuity plan? You want to continue the business? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Nothing comes from nothing. People are loyal to a point. After a point, they get pretty bitter pretty quickly, especially when people are shutting off their power or doing other things and they can't buy groceries. It's pretty bad. Suitable mobile devices must be able to operate and connect reliably to the internet to access Microsoft 365. If a business continuity plan is, okay, we lost our data center, so we're using Office 365 and we're using Azure or we're using AWS, we have to get on the internet. Does that make sense? Now here's a big one that nobody thinks about. On your desktops, you have a certain mix of apps. What happens if you're using other machines or other screens? Do you have the same apps, right? The same applications used routinely must be preloaded onto the Windows 365 virtual system. Did you know that Microsoft now sells a virtual machine like your desktop or laptop, and it's available in the cloud in Azure? And you can basically just access this with anything that has a display and touch capabilities. What am I saying? You can use a tablet, you can use a very thin laptop. You could, it's a cloud virtual, yes. Suleiman asked, is it a cloud virtual machine? The answer is yes. It is a Windows 11 machine loaded with all of the essential applications, and you can kind of customize those machines. Like, okay, I wanted a Windows 11 desktop. I wanted to have Office 365, the latest version. I wanted to have some Adobe products preloaded. You can do all of that, and of course, it costs each month. Now, what they're finding out is that for you to run that machine for a year would cost more than if you were to buy a new machine. But a lot of people can't conceive of the idea that they're going to buy a new machine, put it in a hardened case, store it underground or in a bunker so that it's available after a disaster for use. And the unlikely, it's like that airlines pitch that the stewards and stewardesses give you. In the unlikely event of cabin pressure drops, an oxygen mask will fit, you've heard that, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's like, who pays attention to that? Most people have a hard time paying out money for a real machine that they put in a box, hardened case, in a bunker or, silo, where after a disaster, we can get to it, we can pull it out, we can set up a satellite connection with Starlink because, yay, Elon Musk does Starlink now in our territory, and it's fast. Okay, well, how are you going to power the Starlink? Do you have solar panels? Do you have lithium batteries to store the solar panels? Because why? Well, WAPA is down all around the ground. Anything that WAPA could use to get you power, we're stepping on or driving over. And this is a reality of where we live, right? So now if you have that, yes, hold on just a second. So the main point is this is an Achilles heel right here. People make arrangements to set up alternate resources, but they don't take it the rest of the way. What they need to do is take a person, right? Business continuity planning means I'm going to say, okay, we're ready for the disaster. And what you should be able to do is say, okay, where's the screen? How do I get to it? I don't have power. Cut the breaker. I don't have internet. How do I get to this resource? When I'm on the resource, do I still have the same app because I have to open an Excel spreadsheet? Oh, and Excel isn't loaded. Somebody forgot to load Office, right? That kind of stuff happens all the time. And then you're like, oh, it's not a problem. All I got to do is get online and go to the Office 360 and I can download and it's only 600 megabytes. And I'm like, do you realize what you're saying? I remember, how many of you remember this? After Hurricane Maria on this island, people driving within weeks, 2 or 3 weeks after Maria, driving around the island with their cell phones in their hands, stuck out the window of their car looking for a bar, just one bar of signal. Does anybody remember that? Yeah, because we only had 1 hour left. And then some guys that wanted a generator stole the generator, and the governor got on the radio and said, we're coming for you. The FBI, we brought in a team, and unless that generator is back, that was the only cell tower we had left on the entire island of St. Croix. And you took the generator? funny part of it is the generator produced 600-volt output. You had to funnel it into an entire like power panel for a house, power distribution. They couldn't plug 110 or 220 outlets to it, right? So suddenly the word got out, and the next morning the generator was back, but we were still driving around the island with our cell phones hung out the open car window, trying to get a bar of signal so we could at least text somebody and go, "We're still alive. It's okay. Don't worry." That kind of stuff is serious. Any questions about this? I know that's kind of a rich context, and if I triggered any PTSD on the part of some of you, I'm very sorry. I just thought, yes, we have a question here on St. Croix.
So the question states that you're presenting a resource, right? The
Yes.
Resource being the Windows 365.
Yes. So let's read that again. You are a member of the business continuity planning team. That's what the acronym in the slides, which is part of your resources, right? So we give you the slides to review along with the study guide. You can, and by the way, if you have those open, because it's an open book assessment, and then you have to like use Control F to search for BCPT, you find it pretty quick.
I think it should have been more clear in the question that the resource was.
Okay. So it says you are a member of a BCPT and are presented a resource that will allow essential workers to continue work following a natural disaster. Prior to adopting use of this resource, what are some of the critical criteria that must also be satisfied or valid while disaster conditions remain in effect? Now, the comment was, I think the question should include the answer. That's not going to happen.
Not the answer, just the resource being presented.
Yes, and that is a valid remark. Okay, so I'm just being playful here with Sulaiman, but the simple truth is we're looking at an after disaster scenario, and people either have their homes and their offices decimated. A lot of times you have to have what's called a hot site or a cold site where your servers are available or it's in the cloud. And we haven't talked about natural disaster scenarios that often. I mean, we touched on it earlier in the semester, but it's so fresh for most of us. I think there is something in the addendum or in some of your other resources that talks about this. Just in, Microsoft is offering a virtual PC, and one of the things they're promoting is that it's great in order to work resiliently. Now, they pitched this at a time when COVID-19 was overrunning everybody. You couldn't go to the office. So if you had an office PC and then all of a sudden you can't go to the office, what do? Right? So Microsoft came up with this virtual PC concept. And that's in addition to the servers. So if you need an entire data center, you can spin up Azure servers, which are Hyper-V, Windows 2022 servers, standard edition and data center. You can duplicate the entire infrastructure of a full-scale data center in the cloud. Again, it's not very cheap. You wouldn't want to do it for very long. But the challenge is you'd have to get there through the internet. So you'd either have to have a local presence or you'd have to have something in the cloud or both for redundancy. The key is redundancy. And once again, somewhere in your references or resources, there's mention of the Windows 365 virtual system. They used to call it Office 365. They've since changed some of the marketing terms. When they say Windows 365, they're including the availability of a full-scale PC in addition to the Office apps, okay? And here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a look at this wording again. If I think there could be a plain change of wording that would make a huge difference, I will credit everyone's assessment. But the good news is you get to retake this, right? And I guarantee, because of the way this question played out, whether the wording is revised or not, you will see this again. Okay. And the concepts behind this question are what's most important. You got to have a way to connect. You got to have something to connect to. And at the end of the day, you got to pay your people or they're not going to keep working forever without pay. I'm just saying, right? Those are the essentials, business continuity, right? What does that mean? Well, how many people have direct deposit? Anybody use that? Direct deposit beams to your bank account kind of thing? Okay, what happens if the bank transfer doesn't work because you don't have internet access, right? Do you have another way to do this? They often recommend everybody runs to the ATM and get extra cash right before a disaster. Have you ever tried to go to an ATM right before like a tropical storm hits or a hurricane hits? What do you find when you get to the screen for the ATM? No cash, right? They're gone. If you don't get into the bank, it's just a practical matter to consider. You have regular logistics that impact your ability to use technology. And when we're talking about availability, you don't have available technology if everybody's home in bed because you're not paying them. That's an availability problem. It's not an encryption problem. It's not a ransomware problem. It's not a hacker problem, but it's a real problem. And yes, I appreciate and understand the expression of concern. Let's look at the other options because students actually went for these as well, and then we'll move on pretty quickly. Promptly clear approval for use of the new resource with the IRPT and incident responders. I have a question for you. You have a team of people whose primary job is to check things out when they first start going squirrely. After a major disaster, are you going to be checking with the people who want to understand why the printer isn't printing anymore or the screen is froze? I'm just asking the question. Is that a logical? So to flesh out IRPT, that's incident response, right? Typically, incident responders are the early warning system, but they're not. They would not provide approval. I mean, look at the answer choice, right? For use of the new resource with the IR. Why are you going to the? Hey, is it okay if I use this cloud system so we can, I don't know, work payroll to pay you? That's a bogus answer. Okay. And I hope that explanation was helpful. Update and revise the business impact analysis to include use of this new resource. Now, that answer is not valid. I'm trying to remember. Business impact analysis is another stage that happens well before the business continuity operations go into effect. So now you could adjust the business impact analysis as a part of lessons learned afterwards. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense. So yeah, I'll take a fresh look at this and we'll consider revising the wording based on student interests. Okay. Any other questions? Here's a question for you. Are you glad it's Friday?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Yes, it's supposed to rain pretty hard over the next few days, so. Yes, it was. And we had leaks and floods where we were. Okay. Crisis management. Crisis management is another acronym that's kind of slipped into the middle of all those other terms. When an incident response goes sideways and it worsens, you shift a gear from incident handling to crisis management. Good example, Sydney Corinth. Let's pretend Sydney Corinth's machine is chock full of ransomware. And in your next task, your next assignment, you're going to connect a USB drive to that because you want to capture some data. Are you with me? And what do you pick up? A hitchhiker. And then you go from there to the other office to analyze. Whoop, now your system is locked. Pay the ransom. But it didn't hit right away. There was a delayed fuse. So you got an email, browse some web pages on your company site. Now the web server is encrypted. Now anybody who gets your email is encrypted. This kind of stuff happens, right? Oh, you posted the file to a shared folder across the network for your IT drive. Now your IT department's drive is encrypted. It can spread pretty quickly, right? Now let's read this. Crisis management is another term for disaster recovery, the management of unexpected challenges brought on by natural or man-made events. That is false because crisis management is really incident handling or incident response on steroids. If you're successful with crisis management, you do not have disaster recovery. You do not have business continuity because you averted the disaster. Does that make sense? Okay. So crisis management, think of crisis management as IR on steroids. And if we don't have plain statements to that effect in our study guide or our addendum, I'll go back and revise. Okay? Fair enough?
In the slide, I believe it says that CM is a subset of VR.
It says that?
Yeah.
If you show me a picture of that slide and that's true, then I will change the question and I will post additional credit because sometimes all right, so the slides that we have a new version of the textbook, but in some cases, the presentation slides are not updated. It gets kind of weird that way. And just a couple of years ago, everything was called business continuity. Now it's called enterprise continuity, right? ERP, enterprise resilience planning or enterprise continuity planning. Effective CP programs should include a blank who is a high-level manager to support, promote, and conduct unplanned drills that result in continuous improvement. I did tell you about Merrill Lynch and 9/11 and Rick Risorla and how he was the champion of like, okay, crisis management. This is incident handling on steroids. A bomb just hit. In one case, he always knew there was a bomb that went off 10 years earlier in the basement of the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. He figured out what was going on. He got the intel on it as the security manager for Merrill Lynch. He found out the source and he said, oh, these people are serious. They'll be back again. And he always knew they'd be back. He always told people they'll be back. They're coming back. For 10 years, he said it. And then they flew a plane in. So instead of delivering a bomb in a truck, well, everybody'd be watching for that, right? Yeah, that's what happened. Now you know the rest of the story. Any questions? Max time unacceptable impact. So this is a multiple choice question. The maximum amount of time that a system resource can remain unavailable before there is an unacceptable impact on other system resources is recovery time objective. Should be a pretty plain definition in your notes about that. Any questions? Okay. All right, we're going to keep running until we get to the 0.23 on the multiple choice. Everybody got the true false correct with even private nonprofits. So I'm glad about that. Common to CP. Business blank analysis is a preparatory activity common to both contingency planning and risk management programs. Business impact analysis. Okay. Now you could put BIA by filling in the blank, or you could put the word impact. If you put another entry in there, like you capitalized, I mean, I set the marker so it shouldn't have paid attention whether you capitalize it or not. But if you put in like impacts, the plural, and it didn't give you credit or something like that, just show me. Okay. Any questions about that? So business impact analysis shows up in risk risk management and in contingency planning or crisis management. Almost sound like the same thing, doesn't it? Crisis management, contingency planning. Contingency planning is, hey, plan B, plan C. Oh, we said we weren't going to need to look at this one. Or does anyone want to look at it? Okay, let's slip down to, everybody see those cannot calculates? Everybody max those scores. Ordering. Investigating suspicious conditions on a running system. For some reason, there were students that were challenged with this. You have been directed to investigate suspicious conditions on a running system with an active login. Does that sound familiar? Order your actions according to best practices. Number 1, obtain a record of permission to unlock the screen. That has to do with those emails we were talking about. Number 2, coordinate a change of password to a temporary value. Basically, if you followed the steps of the solution, you're walking right through this. Capture views of open applications. It's number 3, capture views of minimized software because they're on the taskbar and they don't appear open, but they're running, right? And then lastly, restore screen elements and lock the screen, right? Because it's an active login. And that assumes that, oh, I don't know, you have some kind of default setting that locks the screen if it's sitting idle for so many, most computers have that as a default. There are some environments where people intentionally turn that off and it doesn't automatically lock. And if you found a screen unlocked, you leave it unlocked, right? That makes sense? Find it the way you found it. Now, if you find something and on screen, it's automatically deleting a series of files on the screen, do you leave it on the screen where it continues to delete all the files on the hard drive? If you just let's just talk about that a second, because that might be a good question for the next final, the final version of this. What happens if you discover you get on the screen, there's a window open and it's like deleting. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And it's just like going through this thing. What do you do in that case? Just let it run its course and delete?
I guess you could pause it.
Maybe. Let's say you press a key and then the whole thing crashes, right? Could be booby trapped. Okay.
If it's deleting things on the hard drive,
yeah, you unplug it. You yank the battery out, the cord out, you power it off. If it's serious, I mean, if we're talking about a felony or something bad. Now, if we're talking about a runaway user machine in an office, like a training machine, it all depends on the context. If it's in a lab, if it's in a computer lab that's used for training and it's deleting a bunch of files, that's not so critical. If it's in the finance department and it's deleting payroll records, that's a different animal altogether. So the context really matters. So
for instance, for the financial situation,
there are cases where the best course of action, Jadel just asked, what do you do in a case like that? And depending on the context, if you have already coordinated in advance how serious the matter is with leadership, you should have clearance to do whatever you need to preserve the data. And if that means jerking the stuff out of the wall and powering it off, then that's what you do. Okay. But again, those are kind of special circumstances. A little bit rare. Multiple answer. We're almost done. Reflects a clear violation of written policy. All right, so you will train tech staff as first responders for cyber events, DEFR. Digital evidence first responders, and want them to know which discoveries always require immediate action. Select which incident types that meet this critical standard. When digital evidence, first one, reflects a clear violation of written policy. Yep, because the policy is your local rules of engagement for that organization. It is a written law for that organization. Now, it's not like criminal law. All right, proves a criminal law has been violated. If something proves a criminal law has been violated, you pull out the stops. If it means that somebody is doing something dirty they shouldn't be doing, that's the litmus test, essentially. Now, shows a user is non-compliant for essential standards. Oh, okay. Well, maybe their essential standards have to do with showing up, responding in a timely manner to an email. I'm just saying there's all sorts of standards, right? That's a very vague answer. Indicates unethical activity using systems or data. What's the problem with ethics?
It's confusing, like it's subjective.
It's subjective. Thank you, Jadel. So the difference with ethical stuff is that it's highly subjective depending on the mix of people in the room, right? So if you have a written policy that says thou shalt log off or thou shalt log in with two-factor authentication, and logging in for your work colleague is prohibited and may result in your immediate termination. And that's a policy. And here you are with somebody's smart card, and they gave you your password, but you're on camera, so smile, because it's the rest of the system that's not going to jive with this, and it's going to bubble up to the surface. It is tragic how often people hurt themselves and their reputation. These are professional setbacks, and sometimes you can recover, sometimes you can't. It's always a blessing if you can learn a hard lesson and then never do it again. But we have some cases where people use a security card and they know the password because their buddy told them when they were drinking last night, right? And they're not thinking, oh, but there's a video camera where people are coming in off the parking lot and your friend's nowhere to be found. Yet magically, he logged in person in the room, right? That gets to be a problem, right? So that's unethical. I'm not sure why we were bringing that up. Anyway, if there is a policy that says thou shalt not log in, clock in for a coworker, what you're doing is falsifying work records. Do you understand that? I mean, some people just don't understand the clarity of it. It's like you are lying on paper so they can get paid and they're nowhere to be found. They're playing hooky. They're not there yet. And I'm sorry that a lot of folks would say, okay, that's falsification of records, but it's also stealing because not to get into it. A policy makes that clear. If you don't have a policy, you are screwed because stuff like that will come up. And then somebody says, well, but last week when you came in the middle of the night, you didn't have your card and you told people it was okay to log them in for you because you were helping put out a fire in the data center. Why is that okay? Isn't it the same thing? Right? If you don't have a policy that's hard and fast for that, you get into big trouble. That's the important thing to understand. Most people don't think of policies as that useful. If they're written well, they will save your career. All right, last item. Please match the name of the cyber law with its purpose or designation. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the first major U.S. cyber law. Kennedy Kassebaum, Healthcare Data Security, General Data Protection Requirements, European Union cyber law. GDPR is huge, which means the British Virgin Islands, elsewhere in the Caribbean, if they're European affiliated, they operate under GDPR. And that's more stringent than US federal standards. No joke. Graham Leach Bliley, financial information security, right? Any other questions? Now there's another have to protect, and you also have to be able to take your medical records with you. The law guarantees that a patient they have access to their medical records, but it also requires the security of digital and medical records. What law is that? Sounds like a favorite African animal. HIPAA, yeah. HIPAA, right. Yes.
Health insurance, privacy protection.
Privacy and portability.
Yeah. Privacy.
And portability. So if somebody says, hey, you got to pay $50 to get your medical records because you want to change doctors, you tell them, and this is really cool because this just happened. I had to move from one medical office to another, and I was told it would be a week, and I'd have to come back, and I'd have to write a check for $50. And I said, that would be a violation of US federal law. Under HIPAA, I'm guaranteed access to my medical records, and what you're doing is saying I got to pay $50 because you don't want to lose a patient, and making it cost prohibitive is a violation of federal law. Who's in charge of this policy? Let me have their name. Can you hold, please? About 2 minutes later, you can come this afternoon and pick up your medical records. Boom. That's it. All right. All right. That's it for our item analysis. If you have like 2 more minutes, I should be able to import. I wanted to show this to you, but if you have to go, I understand. If you have another class, what I'd like to do is open up and add a machine. I want to add my Kali machine. I'm going into the temp folder where I have it temporarily stored. I unpacked it. I'm going to go ahead and double click this, and there it is, all of it together. I'm going to look at the settings real quick to see if I have any nasty little yellow things. I don't see any there. 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 I'm just going to go ahead and start it and see what happens. And what I should have is a Kali Linux box that comes up on the screen, and I should be able to log in with the default password to use it. Now, if that doesn't happen or it crashes, your mileage may vary. You should do the same thing. And this is in order for you to complete the assignment. Okay? It's that quick. If you built your own, this is a great question. If you've already built your own Kali virtual machine, just show me the screen, because I'm proud of you for doing your own thing and getting your own Kali machine working anyway. That's pretty cool. Okay. So, but if the criteria of the assignment asks, now listen, if the criteria of the assignment asks you to give us the size of the file you downloaded, right? Then include that information, right? Even if you don't use it. Oh, there we go. See? Everybody see? I use the login. I have the opening screen. There's a menu in the upper left corner. I click it, and all those wonderful tools start to show up. That's what you have to show in order to clear your credit for the module for assignment over the weekend. Everybody good? You want to log in. Yeah. And there is somewhere reference to what the password is. I'm going to stop recording and stop sharing. Does anyone want to share